Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review. This week for our analysis with our AI Design Eye, we have a design that was staged on a supplied screen. Now this is a staging that I really grew to love because it gave me the opportunity to really work in a 3D environment. The designs, when they're staged this way, are judged on both sides, so they need to be still telling the story both sides, but the added, I guess, dimension to it is that you can see through it. So you need to incorporate the design each side as part of a whole design and incorporate the mesh that is provided as well. So the title for this one was Espionage. The mesh itself is about 60 centimetres wide, but we are allowed a metre squared. So it is always advisable to go outside of the mesh and to have things that extend beyond the mesh and to use the whole of the area that is provided in that mesh that is given to us. My thinking along for this design was that espionage to me is all about spy books and spy movies, and so I wanted to incorporate the movie and the book theme into that design. We were only allowed to use roses as the fresh flowers, and so I have got the red roses and I've got a couple of white ones there, as you can see, so the red and the white. The other shapes there, a little bit difficult to determine unless you look closely. They're actually arum lilies made out of paper, so pages of the books that I have used, and I've made the flowers out of those pages, so they've got the printing on them. And the water vials for the roses through the middle are also covered with the same sorts of pages. This was at a stage where we were first allowed to use paper in our designs as a plant-derived material. And I think looking at it now, I probably overdid the paper a little bit and not enough fresh plant material in the design, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The other parts that I've used there are Westringia, which is an Australian native, often called coastal rosemary, and some Xanadu leaves as well. And the top and bottom of the design are anchored with books, spy books that are open, one so you can see the cover and the other that is open so you can just see the pages. The design placed second. Oh, I forgot to mention that I also have, in terms of the movie side of things, I've got some twisted cane. Now these were cane lengths that I soaked so that they were nice and pliable, and then I've made them into like a lattice so it looks like a film strip, and then just wrap that around and through the design. I liked the look of it, but I think it was probably a little bit esoteric for the judging that happened at this particular show. And the other thing that I didn't consider was that it was going to be on against a black background, and so that gets lost, that detail gets lost as it does part of the mesh. Another thing that you need to be aware of when you're putting your designs together is the environment in which it will be judged. And so I knew that the carpet was grey. I remember that the carpet was grey. Sometimes it'll say in the schedule what colour the floor is and what colour the walls are, but I should have taken into account that it was going to be against a black background. And whilst with live judging it would be easier to see, it's still not clear enough, the delineation. So lesson learned in that one. So as I started to say, the design placed second, and I was very happy with that because, as I said, this is a staging that I really do enjoy doing, and I enjoy doing the designs and thinking about making it so very three-dimensional, and I get better depth in my designs than I do when they're on the bench. So let's now see what our AI Design Eye has got to say about this particular design, bearing in mind that if you visit Floral Art Review, this is the same sort of analysis you're going to get with any of your designs. So keep that in your mind as we go through it, because it is a very comprehensive way for you to analyse a design and to have an independent assessment of the design principles and elements and what you've managed to do well and what you could do with some improvement. So let's get started. Looking at line, first of all, The supplied metal grid provides a rigid framework of vertical and horizontal lines, creating a sense of confinement or a restricted area. This is beautifully disrupted by the chaotic swirling lines of the contorted black lattice and the strong sweeping diagonal line formed by the white paper flowers cascading from top to bottom. So there's some quite strong lines in this design, and you need to do that because the framework, the mesh that's there, is very strong in its linear presentation. You need to either mimic that or break it up in some way with other strong lines, because otherwise that becomes the dominant part of the design, not the plan material and the effort you've put into interpreting the class title. Space. The use of negative space is the hero here. Because the screen is transparent, the empty squares are just as important as the filled ones. The suspension of the roses and paper flowers in the midsection makes them appear to float, enhancing the mysterious espionage vibe. That's probably true. I'm not as convinced about the placement of those 3 red roses through the middle of the design that are disconnected to the other 2 major parts of the design. I think that I would like to have seen them perhaps in the grid a little bit more so, but in the lattice, so in the swirling parts that were the film clip type of thing, rather than just suspended in the middle of the design itself. I'm also being a bit jarred by the covers to the vials, those pages from the book, because in this instance they just stand out too much. They don't really blend in enough, and it reinforces a line that is not part of the rest of the design. Shouldn't look so worried about it. It's years ago since it happened. Colour. A high-impact dramatic palette. The stark black and white creates a film noir aesthetic, allowing the mandatory red roses to become intense, bleeding focal points that instantly grab the viewer's attention. That is exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to look like dripping blood as part of the espionage feel to the design itself. And I guess that works, but it doesn't work as well as it could. And once again, it's those red roses in the middle that are detracting from the rest of the design. They need to, if it was dripping blood, they need to be the other way around, upside down, so that they're dripping down rather than dripping up. But it is, and once again, thinking about that title, you couldn't have, I don't think, anything that was not dramatic in terms of its colour intensity and its colour comparisons. So it just, limiting that colour palette to things that are high impact helps to interpret that class title. Texture. There is a stark industrial contrast between the cold, hard metal of the grid and the soft romantic velvet of the rose petals, laid with the smooth finish of the paper elements and the feathery foliage. So as is always with my designs, texture was an important part of the design, but it's not the overriding feature of this design, and that is different for the designs that I've been presenting to you. The overriding element that is well managed in this design is space and the use of negative space, but texture is another part of it that works well in terms of contrast. A balance. Design utilises classic asymmetrical balance. The heavy visual mass of the book and foliage perched on the top left is perfectly counterweighted by the grounding foliage, book and roses at the bottom right. So there's balance, there's visual balance, and there is physical balance, obviously, on the mesh itself. So it doesn't look like it's falling forward or falling backwards. And as a complete design, it looks right. It doesn't look like there's any missing parts to it. Rhythm. The white paper flowers act as visual stepping stones. They create a rhythmic downward spiralling pathway that guides the eye from the top book all the way down to the base. That is what I wanted. I would have liked them perhaps to be a little bit more interlinked, but that would have then created quite a mass in the middle of the design, which I don't need. So I still do need that the nod to the negative space, and for them to be close enough that your eye connects them without them touching one another. So there is rhythm in it. There's probably not as much rhythm. The worry I have is that the top placements of the paper flowers, the stems of those are all very straight, whereas the bottom ones have got a little bit more movement to them, and I should have mimicked that movement and had it almost mirror image movement of the top and the bottom. Contrast. The thematic contrast is brilliant. The danger and industrial coldness of the black wire fence are completely at odds with the traditional romantic symbolism of the red rose, perfectly fitting the danger meets intrigue trope of a spy novel. Well, that's good. I guess my focus was on, my interpretation is the espionage in books and espionage in movies, and I didn't quite think so deeply about it being the contrast of those, the elements that are in there in terms of the black mesh and the flowers around it. But once it's pointed out to you, you can see that that is almost an unconscious recognition of the class title. So I did well without even knowing it. Proportion and scale. Working within a strict 1 metre square limit on a 60 centimetre screen requires discipline. You have pushed the boundary slightly with the foliage extending just past the frame, making the design feel expansive without breaking the size constraints. And that's part of what I have learned over the years looking at people who do these particular designs, is that taking it just a little bit outside those edges, top and bottom particularly, always makes it feel like a more complete design, and so you are not constrained by that tall, narrow mesh that's there, but rather it becomes an expansive and fulfilling design. So let's now see what suggestions there are for improving this design. Camouflaging mechanics. When a design is judged from both sides on an open grid, walking the design during construction is absolutely critical because the back is just as exposed as the front. The water vials holding the suspended red roses draw quite a bit of attention away from the flowers themselves. To lean into the espionage theme of things being hidden, wrapping those vials in black floral tape or black wire would make them disappear into the grid, leaving the roses looking like they were floating by magic. Well, I think that's very true. As I mentioned, I felt that they were creating too much attention, and so having them in the black tape would help, and I think also placing them within the lattice that was the film strip structure would also help and create a little bit more movement. They're a little bit static in their placements, and that's reinforced by the white of the pages that cover the vials being so straight up and down. So that's most definitely something that needs improvement. The reverse narrative. Book at the top clearly shows the title to the front viewer. To ensure the 360-degree finish is flawless, ensuring there is a compelling element on the back of that top placement, perhaps another book cover or pages fanned out, ensures the judge viewing from the rear gets the same thematic impact. I think that's very true, and I remember at the time I struggled with the placement of that book because I wanted something on the back. You know, the back cover of the book was just the back cover of the book, and I didn't want it to be a full stop at the top of the design. I wanted it to be to draw you back down into the design. So I think that that's very much something that was on my mind, but I didn't have another book with me to do it. So the fanning out the pages probably would have been an option, because with these books being in the design, they weren't going to be packed up and taken home again. They were ones that came from a charity store, so they were probably less than $1 each. And I think fanning out the pages might have made it, the white of the pages too dominant at the back of the design with the colour I had on that cover. So another book would have been the answer, and have them overlapped at the top there. Line tension. The contorted black cane weaves nicely through the grid, but pulling one or two of those loops slightly further out into the 3D space on both sides of the screen would give the piece a bit more depth, breaking the strict 2D plane of the supplied frame. And once again, I think that's very true. I think I needed to bring them out more, and I needed to have the roses in them more so that they were quite obviously the film strip. And I think perhaps what I could have done, because I've just painted them in the matte black, is put a bit of silver or grey through it so it looked like that celluloid feel to the lattice itself without it being another colour, but have it just a hint of looking like a film, so a silvery grey fleck through it or lines through it in some way. Would have enhanced it, would have made it easier to see against the black of the mesh, and having the red roses in the black tape covered vials through that film would also have given them a bit more movement and joined the two sections of the design, the top and the bottom of the design together. So the red roses that you see in the bottom design you would have been drawn up through the film strip, moving around through the red roses that were to the top of the design. So once again, another very good suggestion. There we have our review of Espionage for this week. As I said earlier, I do encourage you to visit Floral Art Review and think about uploading a design of your own and having that analysed. It's always there for you to review and to go back to whenever you want to have another think about a particular design, but it gives you, as you can see, some really good suggestions and some things to think about along the way, and it gives you an opportunity to look back on a design with an independent view that you can review and think about and understand better so that it helps you on your floral art journey. I will leave you for this week. I'm Hugh Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.